This is John with MentorCare again, and tonight I'd like to talk a little bit more about sexual myths. And one of the important myths that's floating around out there is that we've talked about briefly is that the majority of sexual offenders have been caught and already identified as SOs. And the facts are quite different than that. Studies vary from, say, 80 to 90% of those kind of crimes are not even reported. In fact, they say that only 12% of all rapes are reported. Somebody is attacked by somebody they know or an intimate or somebody they're dating. A lot of women just don't even consider reporting it. They just consider it bad luck. Of course, some do, but it's in a minority of them, unfortunately. It's not true that by just continually punishing and picking on the ones that we have caught, that we're somehow going to prevent the other 85 or 90% from continuing their sexual problems and preying on the public. That some people are under the impression that rates of sexual offense are continually going up. In fact, most studies indicate just the opposite. They're saying that sexual offense rates have gone down slightly. What has gone up is the hysteria and publicity about sexual offense. So just because you see it more in the news doesn't mean that the overall offense rate is going up. Just as in lately, in general, the prison population for the first time in a long time is now trending a little bit downward, which is an encouraging sign in many ways. Another myth is that somehow treatment of sex offenders just doesn't work. You're wasting our money, you're wasting your time. It just doesn't work to do any treatment for it. But actually, the facts are just opposite of that again. We find some studies indicate that they're now half as likely to commit another sexual offense after treatment as others. Some studies indicate it could be as low as 8 or 10% improvement. But if we can prevent any victim from being offended, then we've done some good. The cost issue is too this. They say sometimes it's too expensive to treat them, but actually locking them up for long periods of time and civil confinement, so forth, the costs are much higher. Sometimes twice as high, sometimes a third again higher. But when you multiply it over hundreds of thousands of sex offenders, you're talking about spending a lot of money that isn't as effective as just treatment is. There are a bunch of other myths that we could be talking about, but one of them is that if somebody is offended as a youth, that they're going to automatically grow up and be a predator or a sexual offender themselves. In fact, we find out a lot of them have not been abused in their youth, and even if they have, they won't necessarily go on to become a sexual offender. For example, you'll have a family where maybe all 4 kids were offended by somebody in the family, or maybe even the father, and yet sometimes none of them or only one of them will go on to commit any kind of sexual offense themselves. So there isn't an automatic correlation, although we do necessarily need to protect our children, and if we do find that they're involved in something, they need to be given extra care. The biggest problem is when a lot of little children are threatened that when their offender says to them, if you say anything, I'm going to kill you, or I'm going to hurt your sister, or whatever they say, they're afraid. And then sometimes they'll hesitatingly go up to their mother or something and explain, and they won't believe them. So I would just encourage parents and care providers that you ought to pay serious attention to when children say something. We'll be talking a little bit more later. Thanks.